generation. However, she is first and foremost an environmental educator. She's a native of the coastal Virginia, and she believes that developing a personal connection to our natural resources is key to conserving and sustaining our world for future generations. Helen, with our cast of 55 people, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate being here this evening. Thank you all for giving me the time this evening to share with you on this topic. So all of the things that she said about me tonight, the one thing you probably missed was horticulture or landscaper or something that's focused on gardening. And what I am not a horticulturist, but I have been working with native plants for a long time, and I'm quite the native plant enthusiast. I work with homeowners and churches and businesses to help them figure out how they can become more sustainable in their, well, outside and inside. So if there are some technical questions that you're interested in, if I cannot answer them, I'll try to get the answer for you. If somebody in the audience knows the answer, please feel free to share, because I will tell you, I am not the end all and be all when it comes to this topic. But so I'm speaking to you from experience. I do have a biology degree, and my focus was, there was a lot of plant science in my biology degree, but I am not, there is so much more knowledge in this room right now. So I appreciate you being here with me this evening. And again, don't hesitate to share. And if there is something you have a question about, please put it in the chat. Let me get my screen shared here, and we shall get started.
Should be able to thwart something like this, but it's not. After Afghanistan, our prestige, our power.
Okay, I'm hearing somebody's not on mute.
We're not that important anymore. Well, we're important, but we're going down. We are.
Helen, I muted everybody, so if you would just please unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me? All righty. So tonight we're talking about native ground covers and alternatives to lawn. So the organization I work with is a watershed group. And so why do we even care about what's happening on the lawn? Well, watersheds are your lawn. Your lawn is part of a bigger watershed. No matter where you are part of a watershed. So what people use on their grounds really does matter when we talk about water quality. So that's where I'll be coming from this evening.
Against you. Listen to this. As you've seen from the paper that we sent to the Russians, that
Senator Shane, I'm not.
We have somebody on again.
Everybody needs to mute themselves, please.
In the mutual interests of us, our NATO allies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, as I'm sure everybody here knows Doug Ptolemy and his books, but one of the things he said really resonated with me, because my degree and where I come from is an ecological standpoint. I really like to see how the big systems work, and they work together. So Doug Ptolemy said, a plant that has not fed, that has fed nothing, has not done its job. So that means that if you have something in your garden that something has not eaten, then it's not supporting anything. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight as we move forward.
Lose and say, you've got to get up to.
Before I really get into the meat of the presentation, though, I want to talk to you a little bit about my organization and what we do. I work with an organization called Lynn Haven River Now, and we are a watershed group that works in Virginia Beach, Virginia. We have been doing this now for 20 years. 2022 is our 20th anniversary year, and we're so excited. None of us ever saw this happening like it has. So when we first started, we started as Lynn Haven River 2007. And Lynn Haven River 2007 was just, it was put together by a group of concerned businessmen who said, you know, the river has degraded considerably in our time, and we really should try to do something to improve it. At that point, the Lynn Haven River, which empties out into the Chesapeake Bay, only had 1% of its waters open for shellfish harvest. The rest of the 99% was condemned, and that was a travesty. So those gentlemen set a goal. They started in 2002. They sat down and they wrote out a plan to try to decide how to improve the health of the Lynn Haven River. And their goal really at the end of that 5 years was to eat an oyster out of the Lynn Haven again. That was it. That was all they wanted to be able to do, was eat an oyster out of the Lynn Haven River again, because the Lynn Haven was known for its excellent oysters. So they actually did do that. The plan they put together did manage to produce an edible oyster, actually a couple of them. So they ate them and enjoyed them and said, we've got to keep going. So we then became Lynn Haven River Now. And our focus at that point was still on the Lynn Haven River. We were still working towards having better water quality.
He was just going to go through
and then we realized that there was more going on out there than just in the Lynn Haven. So we started shifting our focus not away from the Lynn Haven, but to include the other waters in Virginia Beach. So we went from restoring a legend by just trying to eat an oyster to we've restored hundreds of acres of oyster reef in the Lynn Haven. We have improved our wetlands and our living shorelines. We help residents to learn how to reduce pollutants, which is one of the things we'll be doing tonight. We've worked on restoring critical habitat, which also kind of falls into tonight's talk, and then engaging our community, which is you all. So the more of us that are working on these problems together, the more impact we're going to be able to make. So in Virginia Beach, we actually have several watersheds. Most people don't really realize how many watersheds that we have. In Virginia Beach, we have 3 major watersheds that the city drains to, and that's the Albemarle-Pamlico watershed, which is the watershed that actually those waterways are in North Carolina, but we drain considerably, a considerable amount of our land down into those that watershed. We drain to the Atlantic Ocean, which is one whole side of Virginia Beach. And then we also drain to the Chesapeake Bay in the northern part of the city. If you can see on my screen, the smaller watersheds are denoted on the map, the big map. And if you look about 2/3 of the way up from the bottom, you'll see a purple line that makes its way across the screen. Between there's the yellow, green, and green, and then there's this, you know, beigey orange color and the red color. So the line that goes in between those is really the amount of land that drains to each side. So that ridge, everything north of that line drains to the Chesapeake Bay, except for that which drains to the Atlantic on the dune line. And then below it is the amount of land that drains southward to the Albemarle-Pamlico. And you can see that really 2/3 of our city drain to the Albemarle-Pamlico. The Chesapeake makes up only about 20%. So what we see in our waters as issues, we have development-driven issues, which are caused by us moving here and building houses and, and building parking lots and shopping malls and all of the things that we need for life, have created erosional problems that allow excess nutrients into the waters. Sediment usually drives that. Sediment is like the car that all the bad stuff drives in. So a sediment particle can have extra nutrients attached to it. It can have toxins like motor oil or anything like that. And then we have bacteria, and bacteria is, when we're talking about bacteria, there's bacteria everywhere, but we're specifically talking about fecal bacteria, the bacteria that can make us sick and make oysters unedible. Another problem, it's also development driven to a certain degree, is habitat loss. We lost a lot of oyster reefs. When John Smith came, he said that there were enough oyster reefs on the Lynnhaven River to walk from one side to the other without ever getting your feet wet. We are at, well, about 15, 20 years ago, we realized that we were at a historic low, and which was only like 1 or 2% of that historical number. In the Lynnhaven and throughout the Chesapeake system, that number has gone up because we are building oyster reefs. We understand the value of those oyster reefs and how they filter the toxins out of the water. So we are trying to put as many oysters back in the water as we can. Part of that habitat loss is also the wetland and the buffer habitats. If you looked at the Lynnhaven specifically, but actually this is true in many, many of our residents on the East Coast, all along from Maine to Florida, we have filled in wetlands and destroyed buffer habitats for private homes, businesses. So putting some of those checks and balances back in place is really important. And then in disrupting those habitats, we have basically put out an open invitation for invasive species to move in. Other issues that we're dealing with, especially in the Virginia Beach area, actually the whole Hampton Roads area, are climate related issues. We deal with sea level, we're dealing with sea level rise every day. On top of that, our land is subsiding. So not only do we have the sea rising, but our land is slowly subsiding. So we get double the impact with sea level rise. And then also we're seeing changes in precipitation. We may not get precipitation for 3 weeks, and then at the end of the month, we may get precipitation every day that is heavy downpours and wind, which is not traditionally what we have seen in the past. We've seen changes in weather patterns, and things are just not as predictable as they used to be. So we kind of live by the motto, to restore our waterways, we really have to restore our watersheds. And the watersheds are land. That's the land that we live on. Our goal is to promote clean and healthy waterways in Virginia Beach. But really, water doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't have political boundaries. Water flows through the earth, across the earth. In Hampton Roads, water flows from the Chesapeake Bay into the Lynnhaven River, or it goes up the Elizabeth River into Chesapeake and Norfolk. Water just goes. It doesn't know where it is. So clean and healthy Virginia Beach waterways just helps clean and healthy waterways in other places. So we have been working to restore, to reduce, that's supposed to say reduce, I'm sorry, pollutant inputs, cut back on nutrients and sediment and bacteria and toxins. And the topic we're going to talk about today really is focused on that. Even though we won't say that very much, putting in native plants and taking out turf grass can have a big impact on reducing pollutants in the water. But it also can help restore some habitat area. It can help promote pollinators. There's, you know, if we can put a little habitat back into our backyards, then we are making a difference for our local ecology. And then of course, we are really trying to connect with folks like you through education and engagement, doing water quality monitoring, and we do waterway cleanups. And we have some programs that can actually help you as a Virginia Beach citizen put some of the ideas that we are going to talk about tonight into effect. Our programs are set up in this nice circular pattern, and I just wanted to show you guys how we work. All of our programs are called Pearl programs. We have a Pearl Homes program that works with residents and also with neighborhoods. We have a Pearl Business program that works with Virginia Beach businesses. We have a Pearl Faith program that works with churches in Virginia Beach to help them green their activities and become more sustainable. And then of course we have our Pearl Schools program, which 100% of Virginia Beach's schools are a part of. And then we have schools, we have private schools outside, even outside of Virginia Beach. We are set up so that any school that serves Virginia Beach students can be a Pearl school. So we have private schools that are outside of Virginia Beach that are actually Pearl schools. And then we work very hard to restore some of that habitat, as we talked about before. Right now, well, not right now, where it's dark and cold and rainy, but all day today, I can tell you that we had 2 barges out on the Lynn Haven putting shells into the water for our newest oyster reef. And then we have our advocacy. We advocate for anything that deals with clean water or you know, improving environmental conditions or supports environmental education. We try to advocate. We talk to our state representatives and our local representatives and try to make sure that they're well educated and are keeping those things in mind. So native plants. I'm sure there's some folks here who are well versed in native plants, but we're going to move through that just in case we have some folks who are not. So native plants they picked an arbitrary, kind of an arbitrary event. Plants are those that were present in this region since the last ice age. But since we don't really know anybody who was here at the last ice age, and we didn't start writing things down until the 17th and 18th centuries, really our native plant lists refer back to the 17th and 18th centuries. Most of those plants, you know, there's a lot of plants that we know dated back much further than that, and we know have a much deeper natural history. But we really weren't tracking things up to that point. So the interesting part of our native plants is as they have gone through their natural development, they have co-evolved with animals. There is this relationship between pollinators and plants that is very intricate, and we'll see a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's like a course in itself. But when we look at plants, you'll see things like the coral honeysuckle on this page, and you see those flowers are just deep, deep, deep tubes. And so, you know, a certain animal, butterflies, there's certain butterflies that could feed off of that, but probably also hummingbirds, other animals that, you know, have the ability to reach down into the flower. So there's been a coevolution that has happened between plants and animals that has really been step by step together. The other thing we're going to talk a little bit about is alien or introduced plants, and those are plants that were not here at the last ice age. They've been brought into the region by human action, sometimes purposefully, sometimes not. And then the most harmful of these plants we're going to refer to as non-native invasive plants. We also have plants that we consider naturalized. They are not native plants, but they are non-native plants that don't need our help to reproduce or maintain themselves over time. They seem to have just fit right into our ecosystems, but don't necessarily cause harm usually. So I was talking about the coevolution. You can see this ruby-throated hummingbird that's feeding on this beautiful cardinal flower. Again, as I said in the last slide, these relationships are very intricate. And as if the plant becomes deeper, you may start to see hummingbird beaks become longer because those are the ones who feed the best. So they can lockstep evolve together. And there's a lot of relationships out there that we don't really know anything about. There's so much in our ecosystems that we don't yet know or understand, that we don't want to lose anything because we don't know when we're going to find the next sort of miracle plant or miracle animal for that matter. And I'm showing a hummingbird, but most of the animals that are evolving with the plants are actually insects. But we have birds and bats and other pollinators that have, co-evolved as well. On this, you see a monarch caterpillar on common milkweed. Monarchs are an animal, an insect that specialize in one plant. And they have evolved to such a point where the only thing they can feed on is milkweed. So if something happened with all our milkweed, we wouldn't have any monarchs anymore. And so it's important that we kind of keep those types of relationships in mind when we're choosing plants and try to support some of these weakened relationships that the plants and animals have, because if we don't help to support them, then they're going to go away. And this is another caterpillar for a double-toothed prominent. It is feeding on an elm leaf. You can see how closely evolved it is with the elm leaf, because it's almost hard to see where the caterpillar starts and stops and the leaf continues on. But today, if you look at that picture to the left, our yards have very little biodiversity. We have a little bit of landscaping usually, and then we have wide open lawn areas. And lawns do not have biodiversity. Even our lawn, my lawn here at home, because we're not much of keeping the lawn up. It's probably more diverse than most because we have dandelions and we have chickweed and we have all of the little things that grow in with the lawn. It's definitely not a monoculture, but it's still not supporting wildlife like it should be. And really our challenge is to support these ecosystems and by raising the carrying capacity of our neighborhoods so that they can be healthy and functioning. We have patchworked our landscape to death. And I'm a quilter, so I like patchwork, but not when it comes to outside. We have disrupted large stands of trees. We've disrupted large meadows. So we need to add these things back into our yards to help these animals as they're moving through our ecosystem, have places to feed, have places to rest, and so that they can continue on, whether they're migrating or they hang around all year long. So is it just as simple as just adding plants? This is the native plant that my mother loves to hate. I love it because it's beautiful, but it is very aggressive. And it does, when it's at the end of its cycle, it does get a little meh looking, but I love its flowers, and I love the way the buds sort of are like little clusters that are just drooping. I think spiderwort is such a pretty plant, and she likes it when it's pretty, but it does like to be everywhere. So because it's not a non-native, we don't say it's invasive, we say it's aggressive. But you know what that means? It means it's a good space filler. If you have wide open spaces, it's a good space filler. One of the things we need to know is that plants don't support wildlife equally. So this is a very large moth. It is about 6 inches. It's called a regal or a royal walnut moth, and it feeds on just a couple of species of trees. And if we don't have those trees around, this big, beautiful moth is not going to be here either. I will tell you that the caterpillar for this moth is quite a character. I think they call him a horny devil or something, but he's just got lots of protrusion from his head. And you would see him and think that he would be an awful thing to have in your yard, but he's not. It's important to do our research before we just start squishing. Here's another one that is feeding on buttonbush. It's really one of the only few things that it likes to feed on. So we want to make sure that we have button bushes around so we can get its butterflies. So 90% of all the plant-eating insect species can only eat plants in 3 or fewer families. So that means we really do have to have a diverse landscape in order to support our ecosystems. Most of these insects really can only tolerate a few closely related species, and some of them may be able to feed on something that's a little outside if they're pushed to, but it doesn't give them the healthiest support, and they probably cannot continue like that very long. So here's 2 native trees, and this is something that, and you probably, a lot of you, if you follow Doug Ptolemy, you have talked about this or learned about this before. But on the left, we have the beautiful, tall, growing tulip poplar. It has a gorgeous flower. It's a very elegant looking tree with beautiful shaped leaves. And then on the right, we have the grand oak. I'm not sure which oak it is. I am not the best at identifying oaks, but I do know an oak when I see one, and that is a big, beautiful, beautiful specimen. So of these 2 things, which one of those do you think will support the most wildlife? Anybody got a guess in the chat? Oh, I see a lot of oak. Yep. You guys are good. It is the oak. As a matter of fact, at the very top of the page, I've got it enlarged down here. Quercus, which is the oaks, support 534 species. That's a lot of species, a lot. So Liriodendron tulipifera, the tulip tree, only supports 21 species. Does that mean we shouldn't have tulip poplars? Everything should be oaks? No, it doesn't. Because remember, the 21 species that this supports probably can't eat the quercus. They can't live on the quercus. So we have to make sure that we mix it up in our ecosystems. And then I've got this bad boy Nandina highlighted over here. And we'll talk about that one in a minute. So here he is. Here's our heavenly bamboo, Nandina. Now I'm picking on Nandina because I love this plant. There's nothing about it that I don't, well, there is stuff I don't like about it, but visually, to me, it's like one of the perfect plants. You know, you have some variegation on the leaves. You have the big showy berries. It has gorgeous stalks that come up, bamboo-like stalks. So, but it is a non-native and it supports nothing. Sorry, going the wrong way. Nothing. See, do you see on my list? Nothing. Zero. On top of that, the berries are actually toxic. And there's been a study that has linked the berries to possibly a decline in the cedar waxwing population. So not only is it support nothing, it actually is harmful to something. So this is one of those non-natives that, regardless of the fact that it is just glorious to behold, we really want to get it gone. It needs to leave the ecosystem. And there's so many things like that. So let's talk about some natives then. Let's talk about them. And look at this beautiful, I love this graphic over here on the right. You can really see how the different root systems and how they move down into the ground. And that is such an important feature we're going to look at again in a minute. But some of the reasons we want to put in natives is exactly what I've been talking about. They increase and support the biodiversity in our area. For me, one of the important things is it provides a sense of place. And I say that, but my example for you is that I flew to Tucson, Arizona a few years back for a wedding. And when I got off the airplane and I was leaving with my friends, they had this beautiful cactus and native planting in front of the airport that was just glorious. And it wasn't, you know, it was plants from there. It was native Arizona plants, and it was beautiful. And it really gave me a sense of place. When you go walk along the Atlantic Ocean, or you walk along the Chesapeake Bay and you see the dunes and the beach grasses and, you know, and the live oaks, it really gives you a sense of place. It helps you understand where you are. Now, back to the more practical side of things, one of the reasons that we promote at Lynn Haven River now, promote native plants so much, is that native plants absorb much more water than turfgrass does, which helps reduce stormwater runoff, which reduces the number of pollutants going into the waterways. So for us, they are a big win. And you don't have to put fertilizers down for them. You know, you can always compost, but they really don't need fertilizers because they started here. This is their native soil. Now, I realized that as our homes were built, a lot of that native soil was scraped away, and we've had to rebuild some of that native soil, but they like it here. This is their home, so they want to grow. So we may have to help them a little bit, but we don't have to help them out like we do turfgrass to keep it healthy. They require much less water. They seem to handle water inundation as well as drought, because that's what our area weather cycles are. And then on top of that, native plants help reduce air pollution. And you don't have to, if you reduce your lawn area, you're not mowing. So you're not putting stuff into the air that way. They also, again, promote stewardship of our natural area, our natural heritage, which is somewhat akin to the sense of place. And then native plants save money. Now, if you go to a nursery and buy a native plant, it may cost a little more, which is kind of silly since they're weeds actually. But they usually will reseed themselves readily, or they'll send out rhizomes and spread. So there's a lot of reasons that we should use native plants. Now, this is a blown up picture of the photo I just showed you, the graphic I just showed you of the root systems. And this is a really poor enlargement of the turf grass area. I apologize, but I think it shows what I'm talking about, even though all you see is a scribble of green on top of a scribble of brown or black. So the green is the turf grass, the nice, neatly mowed turf grass, hopefully at 3 inches, but probably shorter. And then the root system, it's like non-existent. That root system, you know, barely goes an inch down into the ground, maybe 2 or 3 inches at the most, depending on the species of grass. But so even though turf grass will help absorb a little bit of runoff, a tiny bit, compared to the root systems, the matured root systems next to them, you can see where it would be slightly lacking. So this is just a picture of soil and what soil somewhat looks like, but I liked it because it really showed how the plant roots push down through those open spaces and pores in the soil and open those areas up. And that's what allows the water to come down into the ground instead of running off. So when we look at some of those root systems that were on the last slide, we really can see some of those root systems are really taking water deep into the ground. And that water eventually will become part of the groundwater, and it won't have run off. And it will be filtered naturally through the soils before it becomes part of the system again. Here's my PSA for tonight. In case you didn't know, turf grass is not native. I've had so many people try to tell me otherwise, but it is not native. The turf grasses, all of the turf grasses that we use have come from somewhere else. They are not native. That's why we have to fertilize, and that's why we have to maintain them a certain way. And we have to deal with things like mold and different. See, I'm not a big turf grass person, so I don't even know what we have to deal with turf grass, because as I said, we don't have a monoculture. But turf grass requires a lot of upkeep because, well, it's not native. So you have to mow it, you have to fertilize it, you have to control the grubs, you have to dethatch it, you have to fertilize it, you have to fertilize it again. You may have to repair a spot because a dog peed there and it became too much ammonia, and you may have to repair it, and then you still have to fertilize it, and you still have to mow it again. It's a lot of work to get nice, thick green turf, just a ton of work. And you have to invest in a ton of stuff. You have to have a mower and a trimmer and a pH kit and a soil kit, and you have to use a spreader and a sprayer because you might have to put down a fungicide or an herbicide. You're going to pre-treat it, and then you're going to seed it, and then you're going to fertilize it again. Or you may have a lawn service that takes care of that for you, but that's an expense as well. So I'm encouraging you to treat turf grass like an area rug instead of wall-to-wall carpeting. So you can see on the left, we have these huge expanses of turf, and then a tree here, a tree there. But then the home on the right is using the turf grass just as an accent, or just enough area in the back for their dogs or their grandchildren to play ball or whatever. But you can see that there's a lot of vegetation that's going to help take up stormwater. And I bet barely a drop of water leaves that property every time it rains. Any lawn that isn't used should be replanned and replaced. That's my quote. It won't make me famous like Doug Ptolemy's quote made him famous, but that's what I think. Now, you're not allowed to judge me if you know what my yard looks like, because we haven't gotten very far on that yet, but we're working on it. We're working on it. But any lawn that isn't used for something, is it really important, or could it be replaced with a landscape planting or some sort of garden or something so that it is more useful to the environment? How do you use your lawn? So we don't, if we're interested in putting in natives, we don't want to just start dropping natives in randomly. Think about how you use your lawn area, because I'm not saying that you should just get rid of it all, unless you don't use it at all, and that's cool. Get rid of it all. I'm okay with that. There's a couple of yards in the neighborhood next to ours that they have gotten rid of all of their turf, and they just have wildflowers and things in their front yard, and it's just beautiful in the summertime and in the spring. Actually, it's even pretty in the winter. But it's a different aesthetic, and we just have to shift away from it. And I know the aesthetic, like the pink flamingos, are really important, but we really don't need that many pink flamingos in our yards. But how do you really use it? You know, do you have grandkids or kids that play ball or have a need for the lawn area? Or do you have dogs that you want to maintain a certain amount of yard area for? Do you like to play croquet? Do you like to put in flamingos? Or do you just have yard because that's how your dad did it and his dad before him? How much yard, how much lawn do you really need to do the things you want to do in your yard? So it really takes kind of a landscape plan. And some of you are probably perfectly capable and already have landscape plans. But coming up with a landscape plan for your yard so you're not just randomly doing things. Though, let me just interject. When I was researching things for our talk tonight, one of the ways they suggested adding natural areas to your yard is just to stop mowing a certain area of turf and let it go wild and let the other stuff start to colonize in it. And before you know it, the turf will be gone and it'll be full of wildflowers. So it's just an idea. Now you have to work with the city on that, because they may have other ideas, but if it's not an area they'll see, you might want to think about that. So you have to, when you look at your yard too, just kind of figure out, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to support pollinators? Do you have areas that you want to leave as turf because you want to put a swing there, or you want a meditation area, or, you know, or you have a bunch of friends over and you cook out and you like to have space for everybody to spread out. And if you're going to do a big makeover, like our left property to our right property, can you do it a little bit at a time, or should you just raise the whole area and start afresh? So whatever we do in our yards, we need access. And we have a lot of concrete access in our home space, but I do love the stone access areas. And it's one of the places that we can start to move into our ground covers. We can start putting in ground covers. Now, this is not a native ground cover. I'm not quite sure what this plant is, but I do see that there's some violas in here, little Johnny jump ups, I guess. And I love when you can actually get plants working with stonework. It's really makes a really nice, it's just pretty to look at. So however you want to access your yard, you need to keep in mind how you're going to use it now and what you might need to use it for later. And I think one of the things that we usually neglect to consider as we're looking at access is, can someone with a walker come in that way, or can a wheelchair come in that way? Because we just don't know, you know, what our future needs are going to be, or if we sell the home, you know, what their needs are going to be. So it's good to just consider that a little bit, because you will want some hardscaping. But if you use hardscaping like bricks, you know, they can be, pervious if we're not sealing them. If there's dirt in between, water can soak down, plants can grow up through them. The same with this stone walkway. That will be a good place to start some of our ground covers, to start peeking through those rocks and right along the edges as well. Think about reversing the turf. So, you know, a lot of us have sidewalks basically that go through the middle of our yards and our turf, so we can protect our turf. But think about using it the other way. Leave the turf where you know you're going to be walking, because you can mow it and keep it short. And it's a nice soft, surface to walk on. And you can alternate it with other naturalized paths, or if you need a formal path, you can put a concrete walkway and then an offshoot of turf. But don't make it the main event. Just give it a supporting role and not the main event. These are different walkways through the yard. Some of them have turf, but they're used in different ways. So just think outside the box as you're thinking about your landscape. I wanted to show this left picture has some beautiful soft paths that are mulch that are going through some native plantings. But then on the right, we have a much more formalized garden, though the plantings inside the hedges are pretty wild looking, not wild in that they're unkept, but we have a lot of different layers there and a lot of different heights, lots of colors, different interests. But the walkway going through the middle of it is actually turf. So they've kind of reversed its role. Instead of it being an open expanse, it is defining where it's okay to walk and how to stay out of the gardens themselves. So I wanted to talk about access, because I think this is the natural place to start thinking about what plants you can work in along access points. Or if you're somebody who really just wants to rip out your lawn and just start putting in some low growing ground covers, this section's for you. So in looking at ground covers, some of the natives that we have, this is a beautiful one, and it's one that I have had a relationship with since I was a little girl, really, because it's something that's found along the edges of the pathways on the Bald Cypress Trail at First Landing State Park. It's Partridgeberry, and it's just such a beautiful, delicate little plant. When it's blooming, it has these tiny little cross-shaped flowers, and then it develops into a single berry, and it's wonderful to behold. And so if this will work in an area that you are looking to fill with a ground cover, I would give it a try. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful plant, and I highly recommend it. It's hard to grow, to grow from seed yourself, but it spreads pretty easily once it's established. So if you can get a good starter plant or two, it should fill your area in pretty well. Now, let me say right here, as we're starting to go through some plants, I want everybody to understand that I really embrace the right plant, right place. And I am not trying to tell you what the right plant is for the right place here tonight. I'm giving you some options of what you could use, but it's really going to take some additional research on your part to really make sure that it will work for you in your space, because I know we all have garden spaces that we want to improve, and I don't know what your garden space looks like. So please, if you like something, make a note of it, but realize that you're going to have to really see if it's going to work for your locality, for your needs in your yard. Now this is, I love this little plant. The first time I'm sure I've seen it my whole life, but the first time I noticed it was in a mowed yard. It is blue-eyed grass, and it mows very well. I will tell you, if you wanted to put it at the edge of your lawn, it would, and some of it escaped. It mows very well, and it still stays beautiful. So it's a great little plant. It's not very tall, and it has these really just tiny little blue flowers that seem to come up from nowhere, and it spreads very easily, but it likes open areas, and it's just the cutest little thing. It says it grows from 1 foot to 3 foot, but it also, I can tell you that it grows fine for 3 inches. So consider this one if you have some open sunny spaces. It really is great when you have a carpet of it. So blue-eyed grass. All right, this is wild pinks, which is also fairly low. This is really low growing. It's 3 to 8 inches high. And it develops into a compact mound of flowers. And it really is great for covering like large areas or slopes or banks. So if you have any areas like that in your yard, it's a beautiful little plant. And it has a really interesting look. So it would be awesome to add into anywhere that you think you want some low growing ground covers. This one's awesome too. They're all awesome, by the way. I love plants. So there's really not much about any of them that I don't like. But this one is actually a succulent. It's a native succulent. It's stone crop. It's in the sedum family. It has beautiful flowers and really grows to only about half a foot high, 6 inches high. It doesn't get very high, and it clusters and it spreads. It spreads from the roots going outward, and it's a really great plant. It especially looks really nice if you have some stones in your garden and some rocky areas that you want to emphasize. Stone crop is a great flower for that. All right, this one is one of our organization's favorites because it's named for the Lynn Haven. It was actually discovered on the banks of the Lynn Haven. I'm not kidding on that one. This is one of our homegrown famous plants. Okay, maybe it's not famous, but it is one of our own. It's called Lynn Haven Carpet, and it's a cousin to Daisy Fleabane. They first found it near the Adam Keeling house in the 1900s. And so we just put this in this past year. And when we first put it in, I was like, I'm not so sure. But let me tell you, I love it. So it has this, it's got a little flat basal rosette of leaves on the ground. And then when it blooms, it sends this one stalk up, and you have these really cute little daisy-like flowers at the top. And they just seem to be suspended over the ground because the stalk is just kind of, you don't even see it. So, and then that basal rosette though spreads by shoots and spreads out and starts really filling in an area. And they're just really pretty little flowers and a great way to hold some dirt in place. So I highly recommend the Lynn Haven carpet, or it's also called Robin's Plantain, but I like Lynn Haven carpet better. I'm a little biased. All right, here's another favorite, Tiarella or foam flower, and it gets these beautiful mounding foliage, and it spreads like wildfire. So you don't have to worry about it keeping those dirt areas dirt for very long. Once your foam flower gets established, you will have foam flower. But it's pretty because it's got those white spikes that come up above the foliage and really kind of give it this misty or foamy look. And it's a really nice accent in a garden. And this one's my favorite, and I mean that favorite. And that's because it's Hellenium and I'm Helen. So this is my plant. And I gave you the not best looking photo, big photo, to show you something. And this is what I was talking about with blue-eyed grass as well. You can see this Hellenium is growing in a lawn. And even though it grows from 1.5 feet to 6 feet tall, it's okay operating at 4 inches tall too, because it can easily be mowed. And it does just fine. We have this all over Pleasure House Point, along the edges of walkways and actually in some of the grassy mown areas. And it's lovely. It's just lovely. And I love the petals on the flower, how separated they are. And they're just these little fans that all come together. And they're nice and small. They're not big overbearing asters. They're just little yellow flowers that really add some nice character to an area. And because it's my favorite, I gave you another picture. And you can see there's a bee enjoying it very, very much. So you know that it's being good and pollinating, and the pollinators are using it. So that's what we're looking for. Another great one is Coreopsis, the threadleaf Coreopsis. You can see up in the right-hand corner picture, you can see that it's got those just tiny, really inconspicuous leaves. Even though they get thick foliage, it's really fern-like and soft. And then the Coreopsis flowers are just gorgeous. Everybody knows Coreopsis, but it can become a really nice ground cover for an area that is sunny, and you want a lot of bling. Really, you want some bright yellow. And there's some other things that you can use. I've put in here, the first one is Ebony spleenwort, which is a really cool little plant. It's a fern ally, and it spreads pretty well if it's in the right place. I was really excited last year when I looked at the edge underneath our porch and we had an ebony spleenwort growing there. So I'm hoping it's going to spread, and I'm thinking I may try to move it to another place because I do have a fern bed in the backyard. But then I'm afraid to, because I don't want to kill it. And so maybe I'll just wait till it spreads a little bit and then I'll take one. Another thing is Christmas fern. It's a fern, and it's a little bit bigger, but not a big fern. It would be good to add in a woodland setting, or a shaded area that you're trying to put in ground cover, because I want you to think about this. One of the things that we don't like about turf grass is that it is a monoculture. And so even if we're going to put in some ground covers, we don't want to just put in the ground cover. You probably want to support it with some other plants because we don't want it to be a monoculture. We want some diversity there so that we're helping out the greater ecosystem as well. And then the last thing I've got over here is a really cool looking grass. It's called poverty oat grass. And it just, I don't know that it spreads that well, but it's the way that as the blades die, they curl, and it's just got a really unique presence. So it would be really great in a, you know, a section of yard where you're looking for some grassy coverage. It does spread, it is a grass, you can't kill them. So maybe try some poverty oat grass as well. It doesn't get very tall because it all falls down like that and grows in this mound. But these are some other ideas besides some of the perennials that I was showing you before. If you have a big area, so we talked about the ground covers because we could kind of just put them in where we want to take some lawn out or turf out. But if you have a big swatch of area that you're trying to cover, I mean, do you want to ground cover or do you want to cover ground? And for me, covering ground is big. It's a large area and you need plants and you want color, but you also want some height and stuff like that in it. So you may look at some base plants that are more like ground covers, but they have to be a little aggressive. And then you put some of these other things in there so that they come up above the ground cover and add some interest and, you know, diversity to your planting. So for a larger ground cover, for something that stands up higher and can really kind of fight for itself, Partridge Pea is what I would recommend. And Partridge Pea is great for pollinators. It does get up to 3 feet high. I wouldn't plant anything smaller than it with it, but I wouldn't hesitate to put things in like Rudbeckia or Echinacea or, you know, ironweed or Joe Pye weed, things like that, because they're going to get tall. They're not going to shade it out, but they'll add some interest above it. You know, some other things you could use that grow a little taller. You could use, there's so many different native grasses that you could use. And I just pulled out one, but that's just because I could do a whole program just on grasses. So I just pulled out this one because I love the way, you know, it almost looks like it's setting off fireworks above it, the purple love grass. It's and it's clumps. You get nice healthy clumps and it will spread. So, you know, you could use this to cover some ground, or you could put it in with something else like the Partridge Pea and really get some interest. If you're looking at a shady area, you might want to consider putting in something like Bracken Fern. There's a lot of great ferns too that you can use. The thing about Bracken Fern is it can get really big. It can get up to 6 foot, but usually it's smaller. So, but it makes a nice impact in a planting. And if you're covering ground and you're just looking for things, please, you know, consider how the plants that you put in there do help support the ecosystem, because there are other things out there trying to utilize these plants. So we want to make sure that we're adding some variety and supporting pollinators and supporting other animals that need it. Another way you can cover some ground and add to that big, the big landscaping idea is to put in a buffer. If you live on the water, a buffer is just it's basically a strip between your lawn and the waterway that has a variety of different native plants in it that will help slow down the water off your lawn before it gets to the natural waterway. And this definitely helps to improve the water quality. This shows you sort of what buffering looks like. You can see the little pond here, and it's got a variety of different things, including some wetland emergent plants, and then some shrubs, and maybe some small trees, maybe something like Mirica. But those plants help protect that waterway from what's happening on your lawn. And the buffer on the other side, my friend Marianne Kincaid has always been a champion of the roadside buffering, so that the plants that we plant along the curbing of our property slow down the water off our lawn before it gets into the gutter system. So we're planting plants to slow down water going both into the water or going into the street, which eventually will drain to the water as well. So we can buffer, actually we can just buffer our whole entire property boundary if we would like. And that would just keep as much water on our property as possible and let it drain into the ground naturally instead of running off. And unfortunately, interfering with our water quality. You can put in rain gardens. That's another way you can reduce some of the lawn in your yard. And putting in a rain garden is sort of like, it's a specialized garden that is dug out in the shape of a bowl. And then the materials that are put back down into the rain garden are really open, poured, easy to infiltrate, and it fills with water in the soil, and sometimes it'll fill with water above the soil, so that it's like a pond, but it only holds that water for a certain amount of time, so it's not, you're not getting mosquitoes, and you put all sorts of water-loving plants in it, and they, again, if you should use native plants that help to support our native fauna. I just handpicked a couple of water tolerant natives but there are so many, you know, I could go on. That's again, that's another topic for a whole nother course. Excuse me. But something like on the left, soft rush, Juncus effusus, is a beautiful plant, and it doesn't have to be in a wetland as long as it's in a place that gets wet. We have some Juncus at our house, and we actually have it planted in the roof line of our shed, which doesn't have gutters. So when it rains, it gets watered really well, and it's very happy. The middle plant is rough goldenrod, and I'm a big fan of the solidagos anyway. Talk about fireworks. For me, they're just amazingly beautiful the way they erupt in the fall with their golden flowers. So I'm a big fan of any of the solidagos. And then we have on the right, another plant that's pretty water tolerant is Meadowflocks, or Phlox maculata. And it's gorgeous and looks a lot like, well, there's a lot of different phlox out there that are native, and they tend to have a different look than a lot of our native plants. And so they really do add something to our plantings. And then trees. Put in a tree. Take out 6 feet of lawn and put in a tree, or 10 feet of lawn and put in a tree. Put in as many as you can. Trees take up huge quantities of water and nutrients, and really, really help with stormwater runoff. And also they store carbon dioxide, which we need a lot of storage right now. So consider putting in some trees. But do your research, make sure you're giving yourself plenty of space. Don't put it too close to the house. Make sure the species you're putting in, you're not putting close to a water line. If that's going to be a problem, make sure you do your research. And again, trees, that could be a whole nother talk. But just to show you some of the beautiful options that we have, and these are just small things. This is shrubs and you know, sub-shrubs and small trees. So button bush on the left is a shrub, and it has those really unique flowers that really draw people in. And then the middle picture is one of a lot of people's favorites, and that's the eastern redbud tree. And then on the right is the shadbush or serviceberry, whichever you like to call it, which has a lot of ecological value too. So wrapping things up, I've got a couple more slides, and I just wanted to share with you some resources. There's a couple places locally you can go for native plants. There's Lady Fern Nursery in Norfolk. You can get plants from the Virginia Native Plant Society when they have their sales. And of course, there's Eric Gunderson at Southern Branch Nursery in Chesapeake. Eric usually has a good variety of things out there. And then TCC Horticulture Department at the Chesapeake campus, when they have their plant sales, they do have native plants at their plant sales. So you may want to consider going and visiting them. Right now, their horticulture department is actually growing out some cardinal flower for us. So we're really excited about that and happy to be working with them. And then I just wanted to give you the two publications that I used the most as I was putting this together. And the native plants for Southeast Virginia. Most of you have seen it, but the link there is it's something you can just download for free. So it's a great book. But then I also like to use the native plants for wildlife habitat and conservation landscaping, which I think is out of print actually, but it was published by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it definitely covers a lot of species. And then I wanted to tell you about a couple of ways that you can get help maybe doing some of this work. First of all, Lynn Haven River now has a program called the Sustainable Yards Program. And with our Sustainable Yards Program, we actually have a limited number every year of rain gardens or infiltration trenches that we can put in on your property to help you with stormwater runoff. And the program, if you're eligible, provides the first $2,000 towards a rain garden or the first $2,000 towards an infiltration trench, which you can usually get a pretty good sized garden or trench for that amount of money and not have to pay anything out of pocket. If you're interested in that program and want to check it out, it's only for, and I'm sorry, I said Virginia Beach, but it's really only for people who live in the Lynn Haven watershed. It's a program that's underwritten by the city of Virginia Beach, and they had some specific stormwater criteria they were trying to meet through this program. So it's very limited. It's only available to folks who live in that Lynn Haven watershed area. And then there's a statewide program that is administered by the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. And that is the Vcap program, the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. And that program is a cost share program for projects at your home that would reduce stormwater runoff, like putting in a permeable driveway or putting in a green roof or reestablishing a living shoreline along your property if you've been bulkheaded. So there's some money available for that. And I will say that the Vcap program is definitely worth checking into, but it takes years, and you have to come up with the money up front, and you have to have your project approved by them before you start it. So you have to be willing to give it some time to work through it. But it's a great program and pays like up to 70% of the project if your project is approved. But remember, you have to start with them before you move on. And that's what I have to share with you tonight. And I appreciate your time tonight and your attention. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer those for you. But I hope I gave you some things to think about tonight.
So
And-
Helen,
Yes.
Candy is going to go through the questions for you and give you the questions so you can answer.
Okay, thank you.
First of all, I would be remiss if I did not note that our own plant sale, the Virginia Beach Master Gardener plant sale, also has natives most of the time.
Thank you for saying that.
One person said, my yard is covered with pink oxyalis. It's pretty, but it always has rusty fungal spores in the late spring. I didn't know if you had any input on that.
Well, you could always try to convert it to something else that is not so readily. I kind of feel like if something is has a fungus all the time, then it's not really in a good spot. So you could try to replace it with some of the other plants that we talked about in the talk tonight. There are a lot of non-native ground covers that are available, and I would really hesitate to suggest them to you because, again, they're not native, so they're not going to support our flora and fauna as much as we would like them to. So maybe putting something else in that will take over, and maybe put it in with the oxalis and just let it fight its way through and see what happens.
Oh, somebody said that they're a resident of Portsmouth. Does the Lynn Haven River now have a relationship with the Elizabeth River project?
We do. I mean, we are partners on several projects. Growing Wetlands in the Classroom is one of those projects, and you know, we share the Elizabeth River. Virginia Beach has some Elizabeth River, so you know, we kind of work together and on that as we, you know, need to. So we do have a relationship with them, and they do have great programs. They have a program similar to our Sustainable Yards program that you can talk to them about, and they'll, you know, they've got specials on rain barrels, and they'll come out and look at your yard and give you some suggestions. So, so yes, you have some support over there in Portsmouth.
We had a couple of people ask about where they can get copies of some of the lists you have. One was of the plants and the number of animals it supports. And the other one was the plant chart that showed the root system.
I can share those with you. And, you know, I don't know if you can send that out to people who are here, or.
Oh, we can probably post it on the website.
Yeah, that would probably work.
Yes,
I'll do
I
that.
can do that.
I'll send it to you, and then you guys can put it on your website.
One person says their HOA does not allow any lawn over 8 inches. Is there a good suggestion for an evergreen lawn replacement that does not grow over 8 inches?
Well, there were some things in my talk tonight, but it depends on what your growing conditions are. If is it open and sunny, you know, you could probably get away. As I said, you know, you can actually start adding some stuff you know, things like blue-eyed grass and Hellenium, you can plant directly into your lawn and you can mow them, and they're still going to add diversity and support some pollinators, and you can mow them to whatever height you need them to be.
What natives can be used between pavers?
I am not 100% sure what the best choices there are. It depends on how big your pavers are. That's one of the things about the native ground covers is most of them, I would say, are not what we would consider steppable. They don't want to be stepped on. And if you do it too much, you're going to have problems. But you could put, one of the things I didn't talk about tonight was moss. And you can, if it's an area where moss will grow, you can start moss in between your pavers. You can put some of the, something like stone crop, which is fairly low growing, if the conditions are right. And then, you know, I would say try a couple of different things. And I'm a firm believer in seeing it, you know, plants don't read books. So we think we know what's best for them. But sometimes when we put them somewhere where they're totally not supposed to work, they do. So, you know, try a couple of different of those suggestions that I gave you, and see what works best in your yard.
What do you think of the seed mixes like Fleur de Lawn?
I don't know that seed mix. What I would say is, if you use a seed mix, please look, make sure that it tells you what plants are in it, and make sure that it is only native plants. Because a lot of those seed mixes come from other areas in the United States, and they're not necessarily, they may be giving you some plants that aren't supposed to be here. And we want to make sure that we are putting in the right plants for our area.
Are partridge berries poisonous?
I don't know if they're poisonous to humans, but I know that they are a food source for birds. So they're not harmful for birds.
Does milkweed tolerate being deluged by water?
Some of it. The swamp milkweed, I think, is okay with water. Though, you know, it's a kind of, it's not a woody plant. So, you know, I would try to divert any direct, you know, heavy downwash from it, but it doesn't mind, you know, the right milkweed doesn't mind being in a wet space.
I'm trying to see what else. Oh, there was a question about whether the presentation will be posted, and yes, it will be posted on the website. Give it about at least a week. Can you use sedges for grass substitutes?
If you mean turf grass substitutes,
Yes,
and be able to mow them, no, I would not. If you're not going to mow them, then yes. But they're not going to make a nice, they're very stiff, and they have a lot of they're just very stiff plants. And if you are mowing them, I don't think they're going to survive very long, for one thing, but they would be hard for walking on.
I will note that the audience actually answered a lot of the questions in the chat.
Good.
So I actually don't have any more.
Okay, great. That's fantastic.
So then let me just end by saying thank you, Helen. Your presentation was excellent.
Thank you.
For those of you who are still on, please join us on March the 7th. Wildlife Corridors, How Native Trees and Plants Can Restore Hampton Roads Biodiversity. And our presenter will be Kendall Topping. So we look forward to seeing you next month. Again, thank you so much, Helen. It was excellent.